They're legends, and then there are icons. Men whose lives transcend the silver screen and embed themselves permanently into the fabric of a nation's soul. Roy Rogers was one such man. Known the world over as the king of the Cowboys, Rogers spent decades riding across Hollywood's golden horizon, hat tipped low, guitar in hand, and a smile that made mothers trust him with their children and children worship him like a hero. But behind that dazzling smile and those sun-drenched Western adventures was a life far more complex, far more painful, and far more inspiring than most people ever knew. Now, more than 25 years after his passing, his daughter has stepped forward with revelations that are shaking fans to their core. What she has shared confirms everything devoted followers quietly suspected, and adds dimensions to Roy Rogers' story that no Hollywood script could have written. Buckle up, because this is not just the story of a cowboy. This is the story of a father, a husband, a man of unshakable faith, and a human being who faced tragedy after tragedy and chose love every single time. Roy Rogers was not born into the spotlight. He entered this world on November 5, 1911, in Cincinnati, Ohio, under the name Leonard Franklin Sly, a far cry from the name that would one day grace marquees, merchandise, and the hearts of millions. His early years were modest and grounded, shaped by a deep love of music that would eventually carry him far from the banks of the Ohio River. When Rogers made his way to California in 1930, he carried little more than ambition and a guitar. He threw himself into the local music scene, eventually co-founding the Sons of the Pioneers alongside Bob Nolan. The group carved out a reputation for rich, harmony-driven Western music, and their signature song, Tumbling Tumbleweeds, earned them recognition and even brief cameos in motion pictures. But Rogers had his eyes set on something bigger. The turning point arrived when Republic Pictures found itself in urgent need of a new singing cowboy. Their reigning star, Gene Autry, had become entangled in a heated contract dispute, and the studio scrambled to find a replacement. Rogers saw his chance and seized it, though not without a dramatic twist. When he arrived at the studio gates to audition, the guard turned him away. Most men would have walked. Rogers did not. He cleverly slipped in among a group of Western extras, only to feel a hand on his shoulder moments later. It was not a guard. It was a producer who recognized him from the Sons of the Pioneers. Rogers was handed a guitar, walked into an audition room, and changed the entire course of his life. With his new opportunity came a new name. Leonard Sly became Roy Rogers, a name constructed with deliberate purpose. The surname paid tribute to the great American humorist Will Rogers, one of Roy's personal heroes. The first name, Roy, was chosen as the American form of the French word for king, a fitting choice for the man who would soon reign supreme over Hollywood westerns. His 1938 film Under Western Stars announced his arrival to the world, winning over critics and audiences alike, and launching a career that would see him hold the title of #1 Western star at the box office for 12 consecutive years, from 1943 to 1954. Roy Rogers' daughter has spoken at length about the man her father truly was when the camera stopped rolling, and what she describes as someone whose authentic character was even more admirable than his real-life persona. The executives at Republic Pictures, eager to shape their golden asset into the ultimate Hollywood star, pushed Rogers relentlessly to conform to their vision of stardom. They compared him to Clark Gable, lamenting that he lacked Gable's trademark piercing eyes. They reportedly attempted photographic adjustments to alter the appearance of Roy's eyes, until fan mail poured in from an outraged public, demanding they leave their beloved cowboy alone. The people had spoken, and they wanted the real Roy Rogers, not a manufactured imitation. The pressure did not stop there. Studio bosses told him his physique was insufficient and demanded he perform 100 handstands daily and walk on his hands between sets to build upper body strength. By all accounts, Rogers dutifully complied, walking from one side of the lot to the other on his hands like only a true cowboy-turned-acrobat could. Yet even this did not satisfy the Hollywood machine's relentless appetite for perfection. Then there was the social dimension. Republic Pictures wanted Roy Rogers mingling at the grand Hollywood parties of the era, rubbing elbows with the elite and cultivating the kind of glamorous public persona that studios believed would boost their star's appeal. The problem was simple. Roy Rogers was painfully shy. His daughter described him as bashful, a man who genuinely did not know what to say in those glittering social settings, filled with small talk and performance. He was not built for cocktail parties. He was built for campfires. When studio executives told him he could bring a friend to the parties, they surely envisioned a charming co-star or a fellow celebrity who might complement Roy's image. What they got instead was Roy arriving with his hunting buddy, and the two of them sitting on a couch all evening, talking about nothing but hunting while the Hollywood elite swirled around them. It is perhaps the most endearing image imaginable, and it tells you everything about who Roy Rogers really was beneath the rhinestone shirts and the white hat. Roy Rogers always said that his family was his life, and the record of his personal years confirms that this was no idle sentiment. It was a truth written in joy and grief alike, a truth tested by fires that would have broken lesser men. His first marriage to Arlene Rogers brought him the gift of fatherhood, though not without hardship. The couple adopted a baby girl, Cheryl, in 1942, longing to build a family together. Fate, however, had a cruel edge. Arlene passed away just days after giving birth to their son Roy Rogers Jr., affectionately called Dusty, in 1946, leaving Rogers a widower with 3 young children and a heart full of sorrow. It was during this dark period that his partnership with co-star Dale Evans deepened into something neither had fully anticipated. Their friendship, forged through years of shared work and mutual respect, quietly blossomed into love. Roy's marriage proposal to Dale came in the most Roy Rogers way possible, on horseback, in a spotlight before a rodeo crowd, with Trigger beneath him as he leaned over and asked the question. Dale mouthed the word yes, and on New Year's Eve in 1947, the king of the Cowboys and the queen of the West became husband and wife. Together, Roy and Dale would navigate some of the most heartbreaking chapters any parents could endure. In 1950, they welcomed a biological daughter, Robin, who was born with Down syndrome. At a time when medical professionals routinely advised parents to institutionalize such children and move on with their lives, Roy Rogers stood firm. His response was simple and absolute. They were taking Robin home. Full stop. No institution. No abandonment. Their daughter would be loved, raised, and cherished in the warmth of their family. Robin lived for just 2 years before a tragic illness took her from them. Standing beside their daughter's small coffin, Roy Rogers was heard to whisper that she looked like a sleeping angel made small. In her grief, Dale Evans channeled her love into a book called Angel Unaware, sharing Robin's story with the world and quietly beginning a revolution in public understanding of children with developmental disabilities. Together, Roy and Dale became unlikely advocates, 2 Hollywood cowboys who used their platform not for personal gain, but to ask their country to show more compassion to its most vulnerable children. What perhaps surprises people most when they learn the full scope of Roy Rogers' story is the sheer size and diversity of the family he and Dale built together. Between biological children and those they chose to adopt, the Rogers household eventually welcomed 12 children, each one loved without distinction or hierarchy. In 1952, during a visit to Cincinnati, Roy and Dale met a 6-year-old boy backstage whose eyes carried the unmistakable shadow of deep suffering. He had endured abuse from alcoholic parents and had been abandoned to the system. Despite the pain written into his young face, the boy looked up at the man in the full cowboy outfit and greeted him with a loud and cheerful howdy, partner. Roy Rogers adopted him on the spot, essentially, naming him John David but calling him Sandy. Sandy would tragically die in 1965 at the age of 18 while serving in the army in Germany, another wound in a family that had already absorbed more grief than most could fathom. During that same Cincinnati visit, Roy and Dale announced they were adopting a little girl named Mary Little Doe, nicknamed Dodie, who was part Choctaw. Roy laughingly claimed his own distant Choctaw heritage, saying he was 1/64th himself. 2 years later, in 1954, the couple visited Dunforth Children's Home in Scotland, where a 13-year-old girl named Marion Fleming sang for them with such breathtaking beauty that they made room in their hearts and their home for her too. She would later be known as Mimi Swift, and she remained devoted to the Rogers family legacy until her passing in January 2021 at the age of 80. In 1955, they adopted Debbie Lee, a 3-year-old orphan from the Korean War. Debbie would grow up to be a joyful presence in the family until tragedy came calling once more in August of 1964. Just days after her 12th birthday, Debbie was on a church bus trip to deliver food and clothing to an orphanage in Tijuana, Mexico, when a tire blew and the vehicle crashed. Debbie and a friend both perished. Roy Rogers buried yet another child. In the later stages of his career, Rogers faced severe financial difficulties. The loss of his deal with Republic Pictures, the failure of his own production company, mounting debts, unwise investments, and the relentless competition of a changing Hollywood landscape stripped away much of the fortune he had once accumulated. He sold properties and collectibles to cover debts, and the empire that had once rivaled Walt Disney in merchandise appeal gradually diminished. And yet, those who knew Roy Rogers in those years describe a man at peace. His faith was not a performance. He read the Bible daily with Dale, attended church faithfully, and spoke openly about his gratitude to God for the life he had been given, even with all its pain. He once said simply that he had always been a religious person because he was thankful for everything God had given him. He gathered his grandchildren around him and told them stories, taught them songs, took them riding, and passed down values of honesty, kindness, generosity, and courage with the same consistency he had shown on screen for decades. On July 6, 1998, Roy Rogers passed away at his ranch in Apple Valley, California, at the age of 86. Congestive heart failure was the cause. His beloved wife Dale was by his side, along with family members who had gathered in those final days. Rogers, too weak to speak at length, communicated through smiles and gentle hand squeezes. He had made his peace with God, with the world, and with his son Dusty, from whom he had been estranged for years over personal and spiritual differences. That reconciliation, achieved before the end, was perhaps the final gift Rogers gave himself. His last words, spoken to Dusty, were tender and deeply characteristic. "I never expected to see you in heaven." It was not a rebuke. It was the gentle, hopeful expression of a father overjoyed at the reconciliation, already envisioning a longer reunion to come in eternity. Dale Evans delivered his eulogy with words that echoed through the packed hall at Sunset Hills Memorial Park. "Heaven rejoices today because another saint has come home." The assembled mourners, including celebrities and ordinary fans alike, closed the service with a chorus of Happy Trails, the song that had defined the end of every adventure Roy Rogers ever took them on. 25 years on, Roy Rogers remains more than a nostalgic figure from a simpler era of cinema. He was a man who stumbled into stardom wearing borrowed extras clothes, who named himself after a king, and then quietly lived up to that name not with power, but with love. He was a father who buried children and kept going, a husband who proposed from the back of a horse, a man too shy for Hollywood parties who sat on a couch all night talking about hunting and never apologized for it. What his daughter and granddaughter have confirmed is something his truest fans always believed, that Roy Rogers was exactly who he appeared to be, no more, no less. And in a world full of carefully constructed images and manufactured legends, that might just be the most remarkable thing about him of all. Happy trails, King of the Cowboys. The world has not forgotten.